Well, hello, everybody. Absolutely. I was late, but you seem to be getting along just fine. Yeah, I don't think you noticed. But as you know, there's just a lot going on. So you are the crowd that is not going to hear Craig Keener, who is somewhere in the hallway speaking right now. I have a handout. I'm not going to use slides. I'm a low-tech person. Low-tech in a sense. I mean, I did need a printer for this, and a computer, and a couple cords and everything. But for you, just you. So on page 2 of this handout, it's word for word the same as what's coming out in Priscilla Papers sometime this week or next week. That may have just, you may have, I have 30. Okay. But thank you for that. Yes, so when I decided to do this, I also decided to multitask and write a review and then give a workshop about that review. And for you,
thank you.
And you get all the rest in case someone comes in.
I'll be responsible.
Okay.
For that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. I walked right by and should have noticed.
I don't know why you
So if we don't get through the whole, it's 11 pages for goodness sake. If we don't get through the whole thing, it exists. If you're still interested, you can read it online when it becomes available. If you're not interested, you can just be, well, I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. So this first page, before page 2, I wanted to make sure there's a little room for giving notes for if you're a note-taking kind of person. And also just had some preliminaries to say, right? So that first box there, I called it fine lines, mixed bags, differences of opinion. So what I did, I should probably back up and say, I guess I assume you know this because you chose this workshop, but the new NRSV was updated over the last few years and became available in late 2021. But it only became available online, and there wasn't really much of an announcement about it. And so lots of people, including people who are interested, don't know that the 1989 NRSV is now the 2021 NRSV and is available. And it's not available in print yet. Amazon says August 23rd is when it will be available. What I mean is, I just looked it up, because it is available, but for pre-order. And so there's some marketing and business decisions that I don't know anything about that go into that. So this, I guess, will help you decide whether to buy one on August 23rd or not. All right, so page 1, that first box there, I'm pretty good with boxes, so proud of that. Fine lines, mixed bags, differences of opinion. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the differences between an already gender-accurate Bible, meaning that was part of the goal back in the late 80s. And what are they doing now? All right. And of course, whose perspective do I have but my own? I'm evaluating, do I think they made an improvement or do I not? And it kind of stands to reason, doesn't it? That any place I don't think they made an improvement, they would disagree with me. Fair enough. And they would have their reasons. And you might disagree with me. And so there are some fine lines here. Most of what I have to say is just kind of noticing the differences. And there's a little bit of evaluating, but for the most part, I'm just pointing them out. And we can all evaluate them on our own. So here's one example. It's in that same box. Welcome, come on in. There's a handout in the back row there.
Yep. Sorry.
Hey, you're forgiven.
Good job.
You're forgiven. John 4:12. King James, art thou greater than our father Jacob? It's the woman at the well, right? Well, the NRSV, UE. Oh, I should have told you that. The UE on the end is updated edition. And it wasn't easy to find out how do they want us to say that. I found out though, okay? They want us to just say all 6 letters, NRSVue. Just a little cumbersome for an acronym or what. But I don't know why they put the U and the E in the lower case. It looks like they're trying to prompt us to say NRSVue. And I saw one one YouTube person who's talking about, and this is not someone who helped create it. This is just someone like me who's evaluating it. Called it NRSVue. And I thought, that can't be right. But that's just how somebody, it's kind of like the app WHOVA. I don't know. I've heard Hova, I've heard Hova, and I'm not going to tell you what I thought it was because it's embarrassing. It wasn't one of those.
So when we're looking on Amazon, we need to put the UE at the end?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Unless you want to buy a 1989 Bible. I'm sure they're trying to get rid of them. You want to put the UE Updated Edition, the 2021 Updated Edition. All right, so NRSVue. And I found a video of someone who was involved in the process. And that's the way he said it. So I'm going to go with that, NRSVue. Or I'll just say the updated edition. Okay, back to this woman at the well. So obviously, Father Jacob and Ancestor Jacob are 2 different ways to translate the same thing. It's just, I grabbed this verse. It's just interesting to me that the King James kept the masculine father, but didn't keep the masculine sons. You see 2 lines below? And 400 years later, the NRSVue changed to ancestor, but then reverted to sons. Even though one of their stated agendas is to be gender accurate. And they probably didn't do that accidentally. They probably have a reason. Okay? And so I'm not saying, hey, wow, they missed something. I'm just saying I would wonder what their reason was. I think we can agree Jacob had daughters. And they drank from the well. Yeah.
I'm sorry, is that a change that the NRSVue made as opposed to the NRSV?
I understand your question. I'm just pausing. Everything on pages 2 through 11, that will be clear.
Okay.
Right here, I don't know, because this is just like an introductory. I'm just using this as an introductory illustration of how different Bibles will. It caught my attention because it's kind of half and half. But look it up. Let's talk a little bit more. I came in here frazzled, right? I just ran to my room, took a couple ibuprofen, and ran back down here. And so I didn't start cleanly. Let's talk about how to read this thing, all right? BibleGateway.com. Or maybe you use a different app, or maybe you use a different online Bible. I tend to use BibleGateway.com. It's on there. It's been on there for a few months. And you didn't know? Anybody know that? Oh, good. And one interesting thing about it is that they only replaced the NRSV with the NRSVue. They didn't replace the British edition or the Roman Catholic edition, which are abbreviated like NRSV UK for United Kingdom. And so we're in a situation right now where on one app you can see the old and the new, right? Because I guess they haven't gotten around to changing the spelling of color and honor and things like that and actually swap that out. So if you just look at some online app, the main NRSV has been fully replaced with the new one. But then you'll be able to see the old one by just going to one of the links right next to it. All right, in the next box, still introduction here. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. That's what I titled this box. Did you get a handout? It is coming to you for your left. Look, it's happening. It's magic. Right there.
I'm busy on Amazon, sorry.
Okay. You know, you get done writing something, then you think, oh, I should have said that, right? You can't say everything. There's a lot of things that you and other people would rightly say, well, why didn't you address that? Well, because I had a limited amount of space. To put it very I mentioned earlier, not everybody was here, that this is going to be in Priscilla Papers just any day now. And from a very practical point of view, just look at it and you'll see that it goes right to the bottom of the page. Like there's just about a millimeter of space there. So that's the reason. That's the reason I didn't do more, because I'm out of room. But I'm aware that there are other questions to be asked. So for example, the example that's on the page there. In Mutuality a year ago, Christine Woolgar wrote an article and talked about how Ezekiel 16 has the word whore numerous times and the word prostitute, I think, 3 times. In the ESV, that's what she was doing. She was evaluating that. It's a very interesting article. I encourage you to read it online or take this one with you. I've got a couple more, so I'm glad to part with it. But she does a deep dive into what might be the reasons that someone would translate that word in one way and in another way. I didn't do that. And I'm just using that as an example of how there are a lot of issues that go beyond my surface overview that we'll get to right now with page 2. Okay? All right, page 2, paragraph 1, kind of already said that. Paragraph 2 begins the 1989 NRSV was well received by a lot of people. No surprise, it was designed as an ecumenical Bible. It has the Apocrypha. It's used by Roman Catholics. It's used by Eastern Orthodox English-speaking Christians. The team that put it together was more diverse than most Bible translation teams. There were women on the team. Not a lot, but 4. They're listed there. Over there where the column gets narrow, to the left, to the right of my box. And over the last, let's see, how long has it been since 1989? 30-something years? Okay. 2 years more than I've been married, so 37 years. Over that time, the NRSV has become the translation of choice, not for everybody, of course, but in a lot of academic circles and in a lot of scholarly circles. Like, to use just a quick off-the-cuff example, where I teach in Eastern Tennessee, we have our freshmen, if they're willing, buy the Common English Bible. But then we've got one of our professors, when he teaches juniors and seniors, he's like, you need the NRSV. He's pushing back a little bit. He likes them both, so do I. But he feels like we're getting more academic in this particular course. You should be reading the NRSV. So that's just one example. I think you've probably experienced this if you're in a church. How can I say this with a little bit of humor and all due respect? If you're in a church with a pipe organ, there's a good chance there's an NRSV in the pew right in front of you. If you're in a church with the guitars and drums, the drums in this big shell, right, then there's a decreasing chance that the NRSV is in the pew in front of you. It's probably going to be the NIV. Let's go to the next paragraph. That was fun. Now, the NRSV, right underneath the box, of course it had its detractors. It had its detractors right away. Even with the internet that only a few people knew about, people still got mad. And brothers and sisters, or fish for people instead of fishers of men, became the litmus test kind of issues. There's a lot more issues than that, of course, but those are the ones you just know where to look. You know it when you see it. And gender inclusive and gender accurate Bible translation tactics were not new, but the NRSV made them global and controversial and famous. So to my knowledge is the first major translation, millions and millions of copies translation that made this prominent. Okay, bottom paragraph, don't really have much to say. It's just saying that it's been updated and it's abbreviated with a UE on the end, and it's available online right now. Before that, it was available as an app if you wanted to pay for it, and then later this month you can buy a copy. And like it's usually the case when a Bible is updated, it's going to feel the same. You know, if you're not sitting in a workshop, if you're not attuned to these kinds of questions, you probably wouldn't ever know the difference, whether somebody's reading from the old one or the new one. Okay, next page 3, I guess. 1/3 of the translation team for this Bible are women. That might be an exact number, 36 of 108. How did I do? 1/3, right? A little math there. But it might be a little off because they're divided into 3 categories, and I think some of the translators were at this level for maybe Deuteronomy, and then they were at this level for Hosea or something. And so even though there's 108 translators, some of those may be the same people. But let's not get too picky. 1/3 of the 100 plus translators are women. I know one of those personally and asked her some questions. Anybody here know someone who was in that group, or you were in the group? You should take my place right now if you were in the group. Okay. So that's something, right? That's not the case with most translation committees. It was not the case in 1989, although there were some women. Now the rest of this is divided into 2 categories. We're kind of done with the introduction. There's the pronoun language. There's the brothers and sisters, what we think of as gender accurate. And then a couple pages later, there's the texts, the clobber texts, the famous texts, the key texts. Let's skip down to the middle of this page. I'm in the middle of page 3. The paragraph begins, this phrase, brothers and sisters, occurs over 80 times in the NRSVue, where it was not already in the NRSV. So it's already in the NRSV many, many times. So many that they got scorn cast upon them for it. But it's 80 plus times more. So that's a significant difference. And almost all of those 80, I can't remember if it's 82 or 83 or what it is, almost all of those are a change from friends, beloved, believers. Because for whatever reason, and I'm sure they had their reasons, in 89 when they published this, I guess maybe, I hesitate to say what their motivation was, because I don't know what their motivation was. But my sense is that they didn't want to overuse that phrase. Brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, brothers. So numerous times it's beloved, numerous times it's friends, numerous times it's believers. And then also some other things. students, I just glanced to the next page. You don't have to go there. Members of God's family, members of the church, my people, my own people. 3 times it's comrades. I didn't know that before I did this, that 3 times the NRSV translates adelphoi, brothers, as comrades. 1 time it's simply them, okay? So they're just doing a lot of different things. But this time around, the 2021 version, they're much more inclined to translate adelphoi, A-D-E-L-P-H-O-I, as brothers and sisters. And I said most of those are a change. So it's not adding gender inclusivity or gender accuracy because it was already there, but it's just doing it in a different way. There's a few places where the NRSV just had brothers, and now it expanded. A very few. There's 5, and they're listed here for you on page 3. One's in Tobit in the Apocrypha. One is in Matthew 28. You see that I'm in that bullet point list on page 3 now. The risen Lord says, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers and sisters to go to Galilee." Good translation. There were women as disciples in that span of time when Jesus is risen and still on the planet. And Luke 14 and 1 Corinthians 16. I think 1 Corinthians 16 and sisters, it's talking about, Paul is saying, when the brothers get here. And it's a more accurate picture of Paul's entourage, his co-workers, the kind of people he would be eager to see. Page 4, moving ahead to page 4. In my opinion, I think you'll agree with me, but maybe I'm just pie in the sky. It's better. Friends and believers and beloved and comrades. They're not terrible. They're not bad ideas. But do they communicate that the early Christians thought of themselves as a family and spoke ubiquitously in sibling language? Now, some of the older ones were members of God's family, so that would accomplish the same thing. But I appreciate that there's about 80 more instances to give us an accurate picture of how the earliest Christians spoke of and thought of one another. Moving on to the middle of page 4. Language like mortals, humans, humankind, human being, humanity, that hasn't changed very much in terms of the 2 versions of the NRSV. It's changed a little bit. The new one is more likely to just say humans when that works rather than humankind. Neither one of them ever says mankind. But there are a few places where they just made a change. They're in the bullet points here. Genesis 3:22. See, the man has become like one of us. See, the humans have become like one of us. And I'm interested in the next one, Genesis 3:24. Maybe you were in my shoes long ago before I had any sense of Bible translation or Hebrew or Greek. I remember as a youth thinking, didn't Eve get kicked out of the garden too? Is she still there? Because Genesis 3:24, he drove out the man. Okay. Well, now it says he drove out the humans. Going on, page 4, other examples. Ancestors and descendants and fathers and sons. Not much change there. They had already enacted those ideas, and there's just I found one place where patriarchs had been changed to ancestors. But for the most part, that had already been done in the 80s for this Bible. I found a place or two where I thought they missed an opportunity. Sorry to be so picky, but it is a workshop. Bottom of page 4, Ecclesiastes 8:1. Who is like the wise man? Well, the Hebrew word for man is not there. It's a good top of page 5. Lots of Bibles of various persuasions just say, who is wise? Or who is like the wise? Or who is like the wise person? Notice that the ESV, who is wise? The Holman Christian Standard Bible, a Southern Baptist product from a couple decades ago, wise person. And so I'd consider that a missed opportunity. They'd probably disagree with me. That brings to an end the first and the smaller portion, and we're half done. It's 12:03. So we can have a discussion about any of that, or we can move on to the text. Aida.
Well, just one question. In the 1989, when they had Philippians, brothers and sisters, they always have a footnote saying, I forgot what it said, something like, comes from Abusive, literally brother.
Mm-hmm.
They eliminated
Is the footnote gone?
Because I always thought that undermined their whole argument, continuing through the whole thing.
I agree. I don't know. Can somebody look it up? Especially if you got a laptop. I think sometimes just looking on your phone doesn't give you the footnotes. The question is, when the newer version, the one we're talking about, says brothers and sisters, does it have a footnote that backs off of that a little bit and says literally brothers or brothers?
But it's not literally.
Right. Yes. If it says literally, then that would be doubly bad, wouldn't it? Anybody? I have a laptop. I just haven't opened it up yet. And I don't know if the internet's going to work for me in here. So I'll turn it on and we'll keep going, and I'll come back to it when this thing fires up. Yeah, it should be. Would hopefully be. All right, let's go on to the Old Testament. A lot of Genesis texts are essentially the same. There is a tendency to say humans instead of humankind. Helper as his partner has not changed. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you has not changed. The naming of Eve in 3:20 has not changed. I included Psalm 68 here. I just moved another paragraph down. This is where some Bibles say the women or the company of women. Great is the company of those who bore the tidings. Neither New RSV, old or new, includes the word women there. It's a feminine participle. I'm sure they know Hebrew better than I do, and I'm sure they have their reasons, but I would prefer that it had the word woman or women there. I especially value that verse because it has, well, in the Septuagint, it has gospel, and it may therefore inform some of Paul's choice to use the word gospel as a key metaphor for Jesus' work. But anyway, you can see my list there. ASV from 1901, the Contemporary English Version, the Christian Standard Bible, the ESV, the NASB, the NIV, they all say women, and NRSV doesn't. Yes?
No footnote on brothers and sisters that I can see.
Thank you, and thank them. Aida is a little more happy right now than she was 5 minutes ago that they don't have this kind of negating footnote. Down at Proverbs 31, which Boaz mentioned, I had never heard that before, that in India, some Bible translations, he said, a coy wife who can find? Coy and submissive wife who can find? Wow, he got our attention there, didn't he? So the NRSV used to say a capable wife who can find, and now it says a woman of strength who can find. I think that's probably an improvement. I'm not a Hebrew expert, but I think that's probably an improvement. That same phrase, as a lot of you know, is in Ruth, and they didn't change it there. It's a worthy woman. In Proverbs 31, they also changed servant girls to female servants. And that kind of thing happens in this update a handful of times. Malachi 2:16, I knew this might be an issue, but I hadn't really looked into it before, so this gave me a chance to dive in. As far as I can tell, in terms of major Bibles, I'm not speaking of commentaries and scholars, but just in terms of major Bibles, it was 1995, the Contemporary English Version, that changed from God-hating to divorce to their translation at the very last line of page 5. The Lord God all-powerful of Israel hates anyone who is cruel enough to divorce his wife. And that caught on with various translations. The Christian Standard Bible, if he hates and divorces his wife. But the NRSVue still follows its predecessor and assigns that hatred to God. God hates divorce, which you can imagine the sermons that have come from that. I don't know Hebrew well enough to tell you which one's right, but it's important and worth putting in the paper here. With Son of Man, things get interesting. So Daniel 7:13, I saw one like a human being. That hasn't changed. And Psalm 8 doesn't use Son of Man. Use human, mortal. And where that psalm is quoted in Hebrews, it also doesn't use Son of Man. But in the Gospels, they both go traditional and say Son of Man. So I can appreciate that. I understand that I wouldn't have said Son of Man, but hey, they didn't ask me. I didn't join the committee. But I imagine that they probably labored over that. Like, to what extent do we go with a phrase that is set in church history and Bible translation? And I do appreciate that they didn't feel the need to do it the same way every time. You know, Daniel, Psalms, Hebrews, one approach. But then Jesus' self-references in the Gospels, they took another approach. Switching to the New Testament, there's a lot of texts that are word for word the same or just very, very close. That would include the Syrophoenician woman of Mark and the parallel story, the Canaanite woman of Matthew 15, the Samaritan woman of John 4, Jesus healing a woman in the synagogue, Jesus interacting with a woman caught in an unjust legal system, John 8, Mary and Martha, and John 11 through 12, the resurrection narratives. These are a bunch of stories that I looked through and I don't see differences. Let me say something off the topic, but at least as important as what I'm on topic. In the middle of that paragraph there, the third and fourth line, Jesus interacting with a woman caught in an unjust legal system. So in 2019, I encourage you to go back and find it. Priscilla Papers published an article by a woman named Amy Smith Carman, and she said, we shouldn't be calling this the woman caught in adultery. Like, just the thing we call it kind of prejudices the way we understand it. Is that the emphasis of the story itself? And so she looked at different Bibles and the subheadings they use and the way. And so Amy Smith Carman suggested that we call it the story of the abusive religious leaders. All right? And ever since then, I've been doing my best to call it the story of the abusive religious leaders instead of the story of the woman caught in adultery. It's a matter of principle. Well, then I had a student just last year, undergraduate student, her name's Elise, and how shall I say this? She taught me, okay? Because I said to her, hey, you should call it the story of the abusive religious leaders. She thought that through and came back and she said, I'm going to call it the story, what I said here, of a woman caught in an unjust legal system. which is kind of clever because it starts off caught in, right? And you think it's going to be caught in adultery, but it's the woman caught in an unjust legal system, or we could say by unjust legal scholars or something. So that's why I phrased it that way. But back to the topic, there's just a lot of things that haven't changed. Next paragraph, in the Christmas narratives, there are some things that have changed. Joseph is not considering dismissing her, he's considering divorcing her. Wise men has changed to magi. How is wise men still in the Bible, right? like no one actually thinks that magi, literally means wise men. Well, it's tradition. I would assume that it's tradition. And there was no room for them in the inn. A lot of modern Bibles don't say inn. They'll say guest room or something like that. And I've got a sense, and some of you might know better than I do, feel free to speak up, that when we get a little bit bent out of shape about what this Bible translator did and what that Bible translator did, we might want to cool it for a second, because maybe it was the publisher. Maybe the translator said, I don't want to say wise men, because maybe they weren't all men and that's not what it means. But then maybe the publisher said, well, we're going to sell more Bibles if we say wise men. And even I don't know if that's the case or how often that's the case, but the ESV says wise men. And I would be hesitant to call out. If I just met an ESV translator in the hallway, I'd like, you said wise men. That's probably me jumping the gun. They may have argued until they were blue in the face. Red in the face? I don't know, whatever the expression is, against wise men, and it still came in because of the powers that be. Moving on, in the double story of Jesus raising a girl from the dead and healing a woman, hemorrhage has been changed to flow of blood. Toward the bottom of the page, in Jesus' teaching on divorce, unchastity has been changed to sexual immorality. Very bottom of the page, causes her to commit adultery. In Jesus' words about adultery. NIV 1984 was a little different from that, causes her to become an adulteress. And the NIV 2011 makes her the victim of adultery. That sounds like something worth studying, right? Because that's not the same thing. But the NRSVue has not made that same change. They still have a more traditional reading there, or more customary reading there. Oh, we haven't gotten to the clobber passages. We gotta, for the sake of time, let's go to the bottom of page 7. I'm skipping a whole page here because it's 12:16. As with the New Testament narratives, there are some texts that remain unchanged. So Galatians 3, 26, 27, 28 has not changed. The way Phoebe is described in chapter 16, verses 1 and 2 has not changed. I'm on page 8 now. I just turned to page 8. Footnotes. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up a little while ago. The NRSVue has Junia. The footnote says or Junius. And in my opinion, and I think I'm in a room with a friendly audience here, that is an obfuscating footnote. It's like, why do we still need to say, but maybe it's the thing that it's not? So I really wish that they would have removed that footnote. Next paragraph. 1 Corinthians houses two well-known and controversial passages, chapter 11, chapter 14. NRSVue makes two significant changes to chapter 11. First, it has changed from husband-wife language to man-woman language. You got a lot of Bibles on both sides of that. It's hard to know. I'm not criticizing either one of those. It's hard to know. But I also want to, let's all get joyful for a second here. The second half of that paragraph, second, of inestimable importance, right? So that's the way I phrased it, is the NRSVue's removal of a symbol of from 1110. You're probably surprised that the NRSV had it in there. If you know the basics of that challenging, of that debate. And they even have so they translate it, for this reason a woman ought to have authority over her head. And then they have an interesting footnote, or have freedom of choice regarding her head. So the text, the way they translate it is pretty literal, authority over her head. And then their footnote offers more of an interpretive, or a little bit expansive reading, or have freedom of choice regarding her head. I've not seen a footnote like that in other translations. Next paragraph, 1 Corinthians 14. They did something really interesting here. And let's just skip to it. So I'm skipping a paragraph, and this one begins, in its treatment of 1 Corinthians 14, one of the most debated passages, the NRSVU takes an unexpected turn. I got your attention, didn't I? An unexpected turn. One point on which translations differ is how two clauses relate to one another. And many of you have been over and over and over this, right? Maybe all of you. So it's that phrase, as in all the churches of the saints. I put it in bold each time it's on the page just to help us walk through this. Does it go with God is not a God of confusion but of peace? As in all the churches of the saints? That's my view, a lot of people's view. That's the view of, I'm doing these out of order here, sorry. That's the view of the King James. Shout out to the King James. Or does it go with women should keep silent of the churches? Like, there's the rub. Last sentence on the page. The NRSVue, however, has taken a third approach. And it's entirely possible that I just haven't been paying attention, right? But I don't think I've ever seen this approach before. If you have, feel free to raise your hand and just correct me. So top of page 9, look where the parentheses are. The parenthesis is all of verse 32 and half of verse 33. And you know there's no parentheses in Greek, right? I would insert 10-minute discussion here if I was speaking to my own undergraduate students, but you know this. So the way it reads in the NRSVue is, for you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and be encouraged. Parenthesis, and the spirits of prophets are subject to the prophets. For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. As in all the churches of the saints. New paragraph. Women should be silent in the churches. Now, the function of parentheses, as I understand it, is what's in them could be removed. You would lose the meaning of it, of course, but the remaining material would still be a sentence. And so if we just remove the parenthesis, it says, for you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and be encouraged, as in all the churches of the saints. So it links that all the churches with the encouragement and the prophecy that gives the encouragement. It doesn't link it with God is a God of peace, and it doesn't link it with women should be silent. So things just got more complicated. If you're going to lecture on that, you need 10 more minutes because there's 3 options on the table. And I don't fault that. I look at that and I think that's something to think about. And as a matter of fact, I was so interested there, I looked up the people who did the Corinthians passage, or the book of Corinthians, and just tried to see if they had any commentaries on Corinthians or articles on Corinthians. I didn't find anything, but I would have been able to get some explanation there. Okay, so we've had a couple good turns here with the removal of a symbol of authority. Let me bum you out. Moving forward to Ephesians, the NRSVue has, in my opinion, remember the very first thing I said? These are fine lines. I'm giving my opinion, which obviously is not theirs and may or may not be yours. But in my opinion, the NRSVue has not improved Ephesians 5. Most notably, I was shocked. I had to triple check to make sure I wasn't wrong. They moved the subheading, the Christian household, down one verse. Formerly, the NRSV had the subheading between 20 and 21. It was kind of a go-to translation. If you ever wanted to illustrate on a slide two Bibles and how subheadings matter, you just grab the NRSV and grab something. But they've moved it. It's now between 21 and 22. Thank you. So it's between submit to one another out of respect for Christ and wives to your husbands as to the Lord. It does what the NIV 1984 did. It does what the ESV does. Moving on here, you're saying it more powerfully than I am, but I wrote it, so I'm going to read it. The NRSVue is not wrong that Ephesians 5:21 is closely tied to what comes before. But as many readers of Priscilla papers, it says it that way because this is published, right? 5:21 is also inseparable from what comes after. A basic Bible translation policy should be that no subheading should reduce the average reader's ability to understand. If the NRSVue editors thought that the subheading was in the wrong place for 37 years, which apparently they did, then they should have just removed it, instead of moving it and replacing one problem with another problem. They could have just moved it. Removed it. So that, of all the things that I notice, that's the biggest in terms of a negative assessment. The biggest positive assessment is the removal of a symbol of from 11:10. On the previous page, the removal of a symbol of or a sign of from 11:10. Now let's get a little bit more picky about Ephesians. Next paragraph, the wording of this Ephesians passage has been adjusted in small ways, but unfortunately, in my opinion, two opportunities were missed. The first, they didn't change be subject. Wives, be subject. In my opinion, and I know this is not everyone's, submit is a better word than subject. Be submissive is a better word than be subject. You may not agree with that. I think that probably has to do with just kind of all the different ways we all use those words. But it doesn't do justice to the middle voice, a particular thing about Greek grammar. This is why many Bibles add the word yourselves, submit yourselves. And the NRSV didn't do that, and the NRSVue didn't either. Now, I think that if I were to voice this concern to whoever translated First Ephesians, they might bristle a little bit and say, hey, be subject is middle. Be subjected is passive, or something like that. But nevertheless, take a look at my last sentence in that paragraph. I'm about this far from the bottom of the page. Nevertheless, When interpretation goes seriously awry, which of course it does in texts like this, be subject, whether it's grammatically justifiable or not. Be subject will lead to the abuse of wives more easily, more readily, more commonly than submit yourselves. Submit yourselves is, if carefully read, if carefully preached, communicates that it's the wife's decision to be submissive. It's not something foisted upon her or forced upon her. The second missed opportunity, from my point of view, in 522, is that they don't translate idios, idios, which means own, O-W-N, like one's own, his own, her own. The NIV does. The NIV is better here. Wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. The ESV, the Holman, the King James, the NRSV, and many, many other Bibles, why wouldn't they? It's a Greek word that's right there on the text. There's no manuscript dispute. Obviously, most Bibles will include that word, your own husbands. In a sense, it's an unnecessary word. The husbands and the own husbands are the same men. So it's not, and so I think that's why some Bibles leave it out. But when Paul puts something in for emphasis, it's a double mistake to leave it out and say, well, he didn't need it. It communicates without it. Or does it? So to say, submit yourselves to your own husbands is simultaneously to say, don't submit yourself to someone else's husband. It's your own. And if you take that out, things go awry. And I'm kind of surprised they didn't put it back in. Next page, and we're almost done. There are some changes in Timothy. Modestly and decently. Modestly became moderate. Do you see that in boldface? Decently became reverence. I permit no woman became I do not permit a woman, which is more faithful to the way it's phrased, and I think also just a better way to say it. In 2:15, modesty became self-control. They didn't change authority. It still says to have authority, instead of using some phrase that connotes negative use, usurp, like the King James has, or assume authority like the NIV has. They just have stuck with the most straightforward, bland way to say it, to have authority. So that may be a missed opportunity. They didn't change hesukia, next paragraph, from silence or silent to calm or peaceable, which I think they should have. And may I be frank, they think they should have, because that's the way they translate it in a few other places. So they apparently realize that's the import of that word. There's other places where in some Bibles have kind of flippant language or potentially offensive language, like old wives' tales, silly myths, senseless stories, and they've done some improvement in that regard. And it's 12:30, so I'm just kind of glancing over that. Busybodies and gossips would be another. That's on the, overly casual, flippant, potentially offensive language. Conclusion, my view is that in the gender accuracy category, they've made improvements, and I appreciate that. They haven't gone beyond the NIV 2011. Maybe they have. It's hard to know. There's so many categories, but they certainly haven't gone beyond the Common English Bible, in my opinion. But it's hard to criticize them for that, because the NIV 2011 and the Common English Bible kind of stand on the shoulders of the NRSV. It'd be like telling somebody, your kid's smarter than you. It's like, well, thank you. That's wonderful. I raised them. And so the NRSV introduced this idea into mainstream Bible translations. Some other Bibles improved upon that, and now they're kind of catching up with the improvements. Before this came out last November, I would have said that the Christian Standard Bible had a more accurate, more helpful gender accuracy tactics than the NRSV. I'm pointing that out because that's a Bible produced by a wing of the Southern Baptist Convention. You wouldn't necessarily expect that. And in the other category that we just walked through, I would say it's a mixed bag. In my opinion, there's a lot that has just stayed the same, so that's not my opinion, that's just fact. In my opinion, there's a couple pretty solid good moves in the right direction, and there's a couple that are kind of jaw-dropping, like, you had my hopes up. Why didn't you make that change? That's all the time we have. Yeah, thanks so much. Well, we can discuss right now, but feel free to leave if you need to, because it is 12:32 or 3. Yeah.